Okay, so have you ever noticed how scrolling through the news can feel like you're trying to put together one of those giant jigsaw puzzles?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like you see a headline about a training accident over here,
Hmm.
and then there's another one about some deployment happening halfway across the world.
Exactly. And then maybe there's that like random article about Russia doing something in the Arctic.
Yeah, it can be a lot, like trying to make sense of it all, especially I think when it comes to the military,
Yeah,
can feel like its own little world sometimes.
absolutely. And that's kind of what we're doing today, Taking a deep dive into all this stuff. We're unpacking a bunch of articles about the US Army, things you've flagged for us. We're talking training accidents, deployments, like all over the place, even aging equipment.
We're going to try to connect the dots.
Yeah, exactly. We're on a mission to uncover what's really going on with military readiness today. Like, what's the bigger picture?
Yeah, because these stories, when you first look at them, they seem totally random,
Right,
but they actually show a lot about what the Army's dealing with right now.
totally. Okay, so you marked this article about a young paratrooper, PFC Matthew Perez, who died during a training exercise.
With the 82nd Airborne.
Right, the 82nd Airborne. And it's just this like really stark reminder that even, preparing for any scenario, it comes at a cost, a real human cost.
Yeah, the Army Times article, it highlighted how tragic this was.
Hmm.
Perez was only 20 years old.
It's easy to forget when you're not, directly connected to it all, how demanding military life is
Mm.
and how dangerous it can be,
Right.
even training.
Absolutely. And look, this isn't about blaming anyone, but it does make us look at this bigger picture of like, is the Army ready?
Hmm.
And what are the pressures they're facing? Because the world is kind of unpredictable these days.
Yeah. And speaking of pressure, you also flagged an article about even more deployments, this time to Europe and the Middle East. It sounds like the Army has a lot going on.
It does. This Military Times article, it talked about how the 1st Armored Brigade Combat Team, they're with the 3rd Infantry Division, they're going to Europe this winter. They're taking over for another unit that's already there.
Oh, wow.
And then there's this whole other group, the 101st Combat Aviation Brigade. They're from Fort Campbell, and they're being sent to the U.S. Central Command area.
Which is like the Middle East?
The Middle East, yeah.
Okay, so that's like what? Thousands of troops?
Thousands, yeah. And this is all happening while they're also pulling troops from other places.
Like Niger.
Exactly. We just withdrew from there.
You know, that article about us leaving Niger, that really caught my eye too. Can you remind me what that mission was even about?
Yeah, we had troops in Niger for a while now. It was part of this whole counterterrorism thing. They were working with local forces there, trying to fight off extremist groups.
Right, right.
And so now that we've pulled out, it makes you wonder, like, what are our priorities now?
Yeah.
What does this mean for, how we deal with terrorism in Africa going forward?
It's such a tricky situation, geopolitically. It's like Russia's doing their thing, and then you have China, and we've got commitments everywhere.
Right.
Is the Army stretched too thin?
That is the question, isn't it? And it's something we're going to keep talking about because it has real consequences.
Yeah.
Like, how do we make sure the Army is ready, that they're trained well, if we keep having to,
Right.
juggle everything like this?
Yeah.
And what does this mean for the troops themselves? It has to affect morale. Right.
Yeah.
Big picture. What are we even trying to do here? It's a lot to think about.
Okay, so we've got troops all over the place. But then there's the equipment.
Oh, yeah.
You sent over that National Guard Association article, and it talked about the decline in Army aircraft.
Fewer planes. Yeah.
And, like, flight hours being down. That was a bit of a shock, honestly.
Yeah, it really shows you how tough it is for the Army to keep up. Modernizing is expensive, and the world keeps changing. The article said that the number of active Army aircraft, like the actual number, is going down. But then on top of that, the hours they're actually flying those planes, that's down too.
So less practice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And less practice means maybe they're not as good, It's a problem.
So wait, let me get this straight. It's not just about having enough soldiers. It's about making sure they actually have, like, the training and the right equipment to do their jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why this whole modernization thing, it's a big deal. It's not just about having, the coolest new gadgets.
Although I'm sure the troops wouldn't mind that, right?
Uh-huh. Probably not. But really, it's about making sure our tech, our military tech, can keep up. The world's changing fast.
And the article, it said something like, modernization dollars you spend now, it's like you're saving money later. That's interesting.
Yeah, because if you think about it,
It's like investing.
it is. Imagine your car, right? If
Yeah.
you never change the oil, ignore that weird sound your engine makes. They're fine for a bit, maybe, but
Yeah.
eventually,
You're going to have to pay up.
big time, those small problems become huge, expensive repairs. It's the same idea with this equipment. If we wait too long, it'll cost us way more later.
And not just money, right? I mean, if they don't have what they
Yeah.
need,
That's
that's
fear for everyone.
exactly, yeah.
Modernization, it's about the future. The Army's future, but also, like, our country's security. It's making sure our soldiers have what they need to be safe and to do what they have to do.
Okay, so we've got deployments, equipment, but then there's also, you sent that article about U.S. troops being sent to Alaska because of Russia. That seemed kind of, I don't know, tense.
Yeah, that AP News article, it was about sending 130 soldiers from the 11th Airborne Division to Shimya Island. It's in the Aleutian Islands.
I'm going to be honest, I had to look that up on a map.
Uh-huh, yeah, it's way out there,
Yeah.
over 1,000 miles from Anchorage.
Okay, so we've got troops moving everywhere, aircraft. Like, it sounds like things are pretty serious right now. Should we be worried?
Well, think of it like this. The Arctic is becoming a much bigger deal strategically for us and for Russia.
Because it's melting.
Right. Climate change is opening up shipping routes, access to resources, all kinds of things.
And Russia's got that huge Arctic coastline.
Exactly. So they're building things up, doing exercises, testing us a bit, and generally trying to show they're in charge up there.
And this is all happening while, the war in Ukraine is still going on. Russia's not exactly our best friend right now.
It's a tense situation, no doubt. And it highlights why we need to be present in the Arctic too. Not to pick a fight, but to make it clear that aggression won't be tolerated and to protect what's ours.
It's a tough balance, though, being ready but not making things worse.
Exactly. And that's what our leaders have to figure out. Readiness versus, not pushing too hard, like a game of chess, but with really high stakes.
So it sounds like the Army is dealing with a lot, trying to be ready with not enough money, and then this whole global situation with threats changing all the time.
That's a great way to sum it up. They're being pulled in so many directions at once. How do you prioritize things? How do you modernize? Make sure the troops are trained for anything? It's a constant balancing act.
So, where does this all leave us? We've gone from training accidents to deployments all over, and now Russia's hanging out in the Arctic. It's kind of a lot.
It is,
Yeah.
but that's exactly why we have to connect these things. These events, they're not happening in isolation.
Yeah.
They all tie together, and they show us what the Army's up against and really what our whole country is up against.
Oh, okay. So say you're someone listening and you're not a military expert or anything.
Right.
How should we be thinking about all of this?
Well, the thing is, these issues, we might read about them, but they have real consequences. National security, it's not just an idea. It affects everything. The economy, our relationships with other countries, even just our ability to live our lives.
So it's not just about tanks and stuff. It's about our everyday lives.
Exactly. If our military's strong, if they can stop conflicts, respond when they need to, that keeps us safe, even if we don't see it directly.
It's easy to forget about the big picture sometimes,
It is. So yeah, stay informed, talk about this stuff with people. You don't have to have all the answers. Just be curious. The world's a complicated place.
And it's getting more complicated all the time. I mean, now you've got AI, drones, cyber warfare. That's got to change things for the military, right?
It's the big question everyone's asking. Will any of this even matter? Like the number of troops, planes, if wars are sought by computers? Or does that make those traditional things even more important, like the foundation? Something to think about.
A high-stakes game of chess, like you said. Well, you've given us a lot to think about, that's for sure. Thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive with us.
Thanks for having me. It's been a good discussion.
And for everyone listening, stay curious, keep asking those questions, understanding this stuff, it matters. This is The Deep Dive, signing off.